Our unique human capacity for change and transformation is reflected in our spirituality. Throughout the ages, deep-thinking people looking at themselves have come to discern that we are not all at the same place spiritually or religiously. There are different stages of spiritual growth or religious development. The person best known today for writing on the subject is Professor James Fowler at the Candler School of Theology at Emory University, and author of, among others, a book called Stages of Faith. Fowler describes 6 stages of spiritual growth, which I have refined into 4, but we are saying essentially the same thing. I arrived at my own understanding of these stages not out of book learning, but through experience. We must look at these stages with caution and flexibility, however, because God has this rather peculiar way of interfering with my categories sometimes. And people do not always fall quite as neatly into my psycho-spiritual pigeonholes as I might like them to do. At the beginning, the bottom if you wish, is stage 1, which I label chaotic, antisocial. This stage probably encompasses about 20% of the population, including those whom I call people of the lie. In general, this is a stage of absent spirituality, and the people at this stage are utterly unprincipled. I call this stage antisocial because while these people are capable of pretending to be loving, actually all of their relationships with their fellow human beings are self-serving and covertly, if not overtly, manipulative. I call this stage chaotic because, being unprincipled, these people have no mechanism that might govern them other than their own will. Since the unharnessed will can go this way one day and that way the next, their being is consequently chaotic. Because it is, the people in this stage will frequently be found in trouble or difficulty, and often in jails or hospitals or out in the street. Some of them, however, may actually be quite self-disciplined from time to time in the service of their ambition, and may rise to positions of considerable prestige and power. They may even become presidents or famous preachers. The people in stage 1 may occasionally get in touch with the chaos of their own being. And when they do, it is perhaps the single most painful experience a human can have. Generally, they just ride it out. But if this painful experience continues, they may kill themselves, and I think that some unexplained suicides may fall into this category. Or occasionally they may convert to stage 2. Such conversions are usually, I say usually because there are always exceptions, very sudden and dramatic. It is as if God literally reaches down and grabs that soul and yanks it up, a quantum leap. Something astonishing happens to that person, and it is usually totally unconscious. If it could be made conscious, I think it would be as if that person had said to herself or himself, "I am willing to do anything, in order to liberate myself from this chaos, even submit myself to an institution for my governance." And so it is that they convert to stage 2, which I have labeled formal, institutional. I label it institutional because people in it are dependent upon an institution for their governance. For some, the institution may be a prison. In such places, in my experience, there is always a prisoner who, when the new psychiatrist comes in to work in the prison, always gathers a group of fellow inmates together for the group therapy session, who is the warden's right-hand man, yet who somehow manages never to get a shiv stuck in between his ribs. He is a model prisoner and a model citizen. Because he is so well adjusted in the institution, he is always paroled at the first possible opportunity. Immediately he becomes a walking crime wave, and within a week of his parole he is rearrested and put right back behind bars, where once again he becomes a model citizen with the walls of the institution around him to organize his being. For others, the institution may be the military. This is a profoundly positive role the military plays in this and other societies. There are tens of thousands of people who would lead chaotic lives were it not for the rather paternalistic and in some ways maternalistic structuring of military society. For still others, the institution to which they submit themselves for their governance may be a highly disciplined, organized business corporation. But for most people, it is the church. Indeed, the majority of churchgoers fall into stage 2, the formal institutional stage. Although there are gradations, and nothing is absolutely cut and dried, certain things tend to characterize people's religious behavior in stage 2. As mentioned, they are dependent on the institution of the church for their governance, and I call this stage formal because they are very attached to the forms of the religion. Stage 2 people become very, very upset if someone starts changing forms or rituals, altering their liturgy, or introducing new hymns. And it's no wonder that people in stage 2 become so upset when the forms of their religion are changed, because it's precisely those forms that they depend upon to some extent for their liberation from chaos. Another thing that tends to characterize people's religious behavior in this stage is that their vision of God is almost entirely that of an external being. They have very little understanding of that half of God which lives inside each of us, what theologians term immanent, the indwelling divinity within the human spirit. They almost totally think of God as up there, out there. They generally envision God along the masculine model. And while they believe him to be a loving being, they also ascribe to him a certain kind of punitive power which he is not afraid to use upon appropriate occasions. It is a vision of God as a giant benevolent cop in the sky. And in many ways, this is exactly the kind of God that people in stage 2 need. Now let's say that two people who are firmly rooted in stage 2 meet and marry and have children. They raise their children in a stable home because stability tends to be of great value to people in stage 2. They treat their children with dignity and importance because the church says that children are important and should be treated with dignity. And while their love may be a little bit legalistic or unimaginative at times, nonetheless they are loving because the church tells them to be loving and teaches them a little something about how to be loving. What happens to a child raised in such a stable, loving home and treated with dignity and importance? That child will absorb its parents' religious principles, and by the time the child reaches adolescence, these principles will have become literally engraved on his heart, or internalized, to use the psychiatric term. But once this happens, they have become principled, self-governing human beings who no longer need to depend upon an institution for their governance. They will then begin, often to their parents' utterly unnecessary horror and chagrin, to fall away from the church, having become doubters or agnostics or atheists. I call stage 3 skeptic individual. Speaking generally, people in stage 3 are ahead of people in stage 2 in their spirituality, although they are not religious in the ordinary sense of the word. They're not the least bit antisocial. Often they are deeply involved in society. They are the kinds of people who tend to make up the backbone of organizations like Physicians for Social Responsibility or the ecology movement. They make committed and loving parents. Frequently they are scientists and certainly scientific-minded. Invariably they are truth seekers. And if they seek truth deeply enough and widely enough, they do begin to find what they are looking for. And it is at this point that they begin to convert to stage 4, which I call mystical, communal. I use the word mystical to describe this stage, even though it is a word that is hard to define and one which has been given a pejorative connotation in our culture and is usually misdefined. But certain things can be said about mystics. They are people who have seen a kind of cohesion beneath the surface of things. Throughout the ages, mystics have seen connections between men and women, between humans and other creatures, between people walking the earth and those who aren't even here. Seeing that kind of interconnectedness underneath the surface of things, mystics of all cultures and religions have spoken of things in terms of unity and community. They also have always spoken in terms of paradox. The word mystical has as its root the word mystery. Mystics are people who love mystery. They love to solve mysteries, and yet at the same time, they know that the more they solve, the more mystery they are going to encounter. But they are very comfortable living in a world of mystery, whereas people in stage 2 are most uncomfortable when things aren't cut and dry. These stages hold true not only for Christianity, and not only in the United States, but in all nations, cultures, and religions. Indeed, one of the things that characterizes all of the world's great religions is that they seem to have a capacity to speak to people in both stage 2 and stage 4, as if the very teachings of a given religion have two different translations. To take an example from Judaism, Psalm 111 ends with, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom." At stage 2, this is translated to mean, when you start fearing that big cop in the sky, you really wise up. That's true. At stage 4, it is translated to mean, the awe of God shows you the way to enlightenment. And that's also true. Jesus is my Savior is a favorite statement among Christians and provides another example. Among stage 2 people, that tends to be translated to mean that Jesus is a kind of fairy godmother who can rescue you whenever you get into trouble, as long as you can remember to call upon his name. And that's true. He will do exactly that. Whereas in stage 4, people read it to mean that Jesus, through his life and death, taught me the way that I myself must follow for my salvation. And that is also true. As I noted, this quality of dual translation holds true not just for Christianity and Judaism, but also for Islam, Taoism, Buddhism, and Hinduism. Indeed, I think it is what makes them great religions. They all give room for both the stage 2 and stage 4 believers.